Alright, so we've got our oil drain, we've got our flywheel back on, we've got the shroud in, and I've turned the crank start mechanism so that it's facing up for easier starting once it's installed in the cart. At this point, we're going to turn it around, and I'll sit it back like that. In fact, we'll, there we go. So, you are going to need your 10 millimeter. Take these out. Now this engine's brand new, so normally you take the crankcase cover off an engine, you'll probably want to change the gasket, but because it's brand new, hasn't been subject to a lot of heat or stress, just reuse it. I'm sure you guys can get away with doing that. So once that's off, we'll take this cover off. Should be able to just wiggle it off. Yeah, I can feel there's some tension in that crank. Yeah, definitely lots of pieces stuck in there. So there's our camshaft has come right out with that. So you want to be careful not to pop these lobes out if your camshaft comes out like that. We can put it back in later and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so looking in here, yeah, you can see a lot of my metal flakes and such from drilling in the top. Yeah, we are going to take that governor wheel out. Okay, so there's the counterweights that spring that mechanism forward. So now you can see here is the low oil mechanism, and that's essentially the switch that's connected to that the sensor on the side there. And now you can go ahead and remove those pieces, or you can leave it in. Root around in there and get as much as you can out of there and clean it up before we put it all back together. Okay, so I've opted to take out the low oil sensor, and the reason why I did that is the wire that was going through there simply routes through this this tube here and comes right out of that hole. So with it pulled out, now that hole is actually a hole right into the crankcase, so obviously that's no good. But if you note the dimensions of this bolt, somehow I managed to fluke out just rooting around some of the stuff that I had, and I discovered the exact right bolt. So on the end of this was some rubber O-rings, similar to this one here, except it was a smaller size. And what I've done is actually just put the bolt head so that the bolt was facing out, and then put the nut on the back side, and there's plenty of clearance for the crank to go around past there and clear that without hitting anything. So we're good to go there. That's freed up a whole bunch of room in the bottom. I have discovered that this governor arm, I'm not sure how in other people's videos and on instructions on websites that I've seen, it says to just leave this governor arm in there. And it is for sure hitting stuff in there, and yeah, this simply can't exist like that. So it is going to have to come out. It's going to have to come out in the same manner that we took the post out, the shaft out for the governor gear. So I'm going to try that now. Use the same method with the punch, just to punch this out from the top here. I'm going to rotate this into a position where it's not going to hit the arm, like right there, and then I'm just going to pound that out. Okay, so I managed to get that rod out of the crankcase, and this is the rod that pushes on the governor. So this is the governor wheel spinning. It sits on this shaft, and this is the shaft that we knocked out from behind the flywheel, and that came out relatively easy. There's the weights. As it spins, it pushes this lever out, or sorry, this button we'll call it, and that pushes on the governor arm inside. So without that there, this arm is simply free to move wherever it wants inside the crankcase, except for easily out. It binds with everything in there. And it was a real nightmare trying to get this out. So I would suggest, if you've gone this route and you have this in there, and this is still sticking up in there, take a pair of bolt cutters and chop as much off the top as you can, because what happens is you try and pound this through into the crankshaft, and it invariably hits through the crankcase, and it invariably hits the crankshaft, and you can't push it anymore. So if this were shorter, it would come out easy. You can see there's a bend in here from me just working it, and it took forever and a day to get this thing to the point without trying to bind all the components inside, just to get this where it would actually, you know, come out. So that was a nightmare. There was a lot of 4-letter words. Nothing broken or bloody, but you know, avoid it if you can. So what I've done now is I've put a piece of tissue in underneath here, and I'm tapping this hole out where the governor arm was, and I'm doing this with another 1/4 bolt just because that's what I have on hand, and it's very close to the size as it is. So I'm going to just tap that out. That makes a really nice thread. I'll test it out with my bolt. Yeah, that goes in there just wonderfully. So wrap a couple wraps onto that, and I threaded it pretty deep, and you never really want to get this out of there, so throw lots on there. There we go. I'm going to thread that in there. I've got tin nail kicking around, and there wasn't a huge amount of bite to it. In fact, that's 3/8, I think. Yeah. So I'm just going to just snug it. Alright, so we've got the camshaft back in there. I put the piston at top dead center. That is to say, just as the piston is highest in the bore, and then just make sure that that red line lines up with the indent in the crank gear. So that's all in place. Our valve tappets, the push rods and everything are operating correctly. We've got our gasket back in place. I'm simply just going to put this back in. Now it's a good thing just to make sure everything's clean here on the journals and the bearings, and you know, you've got a nicely oiled surface, and that seal on the outside is nicely oiled. So avoid the key when you're going back onto it, and just push it back on. Just gently wiggle it into place, just like that. Now, you're going to take your impact wrench, back with our 11mm socket, and you're going to very gently put these in. We are torqued. So, assuming you've got everything back in the correct order, and if you're doing it the same way it came out, noting that the position of top dead center and that sort of thing, you should be okay. So just verify you can pull it still. Yeah, looks good. Now before we put this back on the cart, if you have a clutch slash chain guard, you're going to want to put that on there now, because otherwise once the clutch is on there, you're never going to get behind there. So I have one here that came with the Briggs & Stratton World formula. It just happens to fit, and the same bolts that went in there also fit. So I'm going to go ahead and mount that now.